Hello, everybody. Once again, it is your good friend Pozzible here with Joe.
Hello.
And we're going to wrap up the 80s cartoons that we know and love. We left off with Disney. We had a lot to say about these cartoons. And you know what? These are the memories. These are what we grew up on. The great times we had. DuckTales, of course, classic. Next up, we do want to talk about Alf. Now, this is one that you never really saw, did you, Joe?
In all honesty, I didn't even realize there was an Alf cartoon.
What's funny is this is another one of those real life coming to cartoons. It's a way of what we call milking the cow. You got Alf. It's a hit TV show about an alien from Melmac who comes to planet Earth. So they decided to make a movie, a cartoon show based on Alf when he lived on Melmac. Okay. This was before Melmac was destroyed. And what was interesting, one of the shows, and matter of fact, the only show that I remember of this, was one that dealt with the concept of violence and how television and movies were becoming more and more violent. Trust me, if you watch movies nowadays, they are nothing like they were back in the 80s. Back in the 80s, they were very violent. Things had to blow up every single time. People got shot up, even though you didn't see blood splattering. I felt it amazing that, back then, we had the lunch pail of Rambo and the binders of Rambo.
Oh yeah,
he was a big kid hero back in the day, and they actually were. If you ever watch an Alf animated series, you'll see one where they have this one alien, even though he's on his own home planet, that acts like Arnold Schwarzenegger, has the accent like Arnold Schwarzenegger, big and buff, like Arnold was back in the day. And they were trying to talk about, how he shouldn't be using violence all the time to solve his problems. Again, trying to make a moral. If you've been watching the past two podcasts, you'll know that 80 shows were big into morals and fables and teaching lessons and stuff. And so we're going to get up to our next one, which is...
Saturday Supercade.
Now, this one is the ultimate one.
Yes, I used to get up every Saturday morning just to watch this show.
Now, this one was different than any of the other ones we covered because this one was not based off of the same people over and over again. Sometimes you didn't know who you'd be watching.
Yeah, most of them, they followed the same format, but it was any collection of, I think Donkey Kong, Hubert, Frogger, Donkey Kong Jr., and Pitfall. I think there might have been even one more in there, but I can't remember.
Now, for those of you who do not know, these were actually big arcades back in the 80s, when the arcade was king. And the arcades and video games were everywhere, just for a quarter, maybe 50 cents, maybe $1, depending upon what game you were playing. That's what these shows were based off of. And, even consoles, like Pitfall wasn't a quarter game, it was the Atari home game.
I used to love Pitfall, and that's one of the reasons I started watching this. I think my favorite cartoon on this one would more than likely be Hubert and maybe Donkey Kong.
Now, the other cool part was some of these video games didn't have what were a part of the Saturday Supercade, because this was very short stories. These weren't 30-minute stories. These were like 10, 5-minute stories.
Yeah, they were collections.
Yeah, collections. Whereas Pac-Man, he actually had his own story. He had his own 30-minute show.
Yeah, we've hit, Pozzible did a great job here hitting all of my favorite cartoons in the 80s, pretty much.
Now, this is not something that's gone away. You have to remember, Angry Birds right now is coming out with their own show now, from what I understand. I don't know if it's really going to take off, but hey, if they could do it here, why not do it with Angry Birds, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, why not?
Now, of course, we also have this show, which was probably, in my opinion, the most original show you could ever come up with.
Yeah, this was, I remember watching this one as a kid. I, of course, horrible at solving the Rubik's Cube, so...
I still haven't figured it out.
Yeah, I'm kind of envious of the little kid there in the middle.
Yeah, the little kid in the middle, you have to remember, back in the day, in the 80s, when the Rubik's first came out, it shot to humongous popularity. And they had contests, and this kid is supposed to be a Rubik's Cube solving genius. And he can solve all these Rubik's Cubes. But one day, he solves a Rubik's Cube, and guess what it turns out to be? This alien. Now, he's supposed to be an alien from another planet. Yeah. Do you remember why he became a Rubik's Cube?
I don't remember the show that much. The biggest thing I remember about the show is it had that Superman feel to it, in the sense that the cube had the weirdest ways of getting scrambled. It's like, you know, we got this cube that can do almost anything. Oh, I dropped it. Now it's scrambled and it's powerless.
Yes, he could actually change. Now, I don't know if you've ever owned a Rubik's Cube or dropped a Rubik's Cube, but when you drop a Rubik's Cube, the colors don't change. But when he fell, he changed often. But when he became normal, he could do anything.
Pretty much, but they always had to get that little kid. It's like, oh, and sometimes the Rubik's Cube was like just out of his reach to grab it and solve it.
Right. But whenever he could solve it and almost right away save the day.
Yeah.
You know? But still, very original show. I mean, come on, if you're going to make a TV show about a Rubik's Cube, what else are you really going to do, you know? All right, next up, we have, oops, the wrong button. There we go. Okay, Laser Tag Academy. This one makes me mad.
Yeah, I know.
I liked it.
Yeah, I didn't have a problem. I thought it was pretty good. Good concept.
If you ever want to look at a list of some of the worst television shows from the 80s, this one almost always pops up. But, I mean, like the Rubik's Cube, what else are you going to do with it, you know? Here's the funny part, okay? You're looking at this poster. They're all related, except for the dog, of course. But they're all related. She's from the future. The girl in red, the three in the back, they're from modern day. They use laser tag, of course, you know, again, using the guns.
Yep.
Only this time, if you shoot somebody, they don't die. They just, like, lose their power. They can't shoot you back or something.
Yeah, I know. I forget what the rule was.
But one thing I liked about it is about time travel. You know, when she shot her little thing and she shot all their little red things in the middle, it would transport them to a certain time, and they had to chase this bad guy.
Yeah, and I forget. Like I said, I remember this one too well.
The one thing that was hilarious, though, the only show that I do remember, even very vaguely, they went back in time and they met up with their great grandparents, and the guy in blue, his great grandmother actually like falls in love with him, has a hot for him. It's like, I can't tell her we're related. You know? Kind of an interesting storyline for something that's definitely for little kids. Again, even though it's for little kids, I enjoyed it. I liked laser tag. I never got to play laser tag. I got to play in photons. You know, back in the day, we actually had buildings like Spectrum laser tag buildings where you run into, you can shoot. They're not as big as they used to be, but they used to be very popular.
I actually had the laser tag little thing on the chest.
Yeah, awesome game. Next up. 80's.
Yes.
This is the 80's right here. When Dungeons and Dragons, the game, was becoming very popular, they came up with this TV show. And in the 90s, they made Dungeons and Dragons movies, but people were very upset because it had nothing to do with the TV show.
It didn't focus on the cartoon or capture the cartoon. It didn't even really. I've been playing this game since its inception, pretty much in the very early 80s. The pencil and paper Dungeons and Dragons. And this was awesome. This cartoon was phenomenal. In fact, I bought the DVD set, the collector's edition, when the first day it came out, because I loved the show. Yeah, this is one of those shows that never really got to take off. You know, one thing about the show that made it very different from all the other shows is that the villain had something else to worry about besides the heroes. You know, that humongous dragon in the back was something everyone could fear, and everybody did fear Tiamat, and rightly so. Yeah, he was a powerful dragon. Very clever shows too, especially for some people that were transported to this mystical realm. The shows were still very down to earth. You know, they had shows about trust where they thought Hank was going to betray them. They had shows about reliance when they lost all their powers. My favorite show was when they needed to figure. They got so angry that Venger kept destroying their way home. They said, they called Dungeon Masters, how do we beat this guy? And it's like, go to the dragon's graveyard. He was against it because he didn't want him to be that type of people. But they went to the dragon's graveyard and they actually had Venger to where they could have ended him right there, and they had to make the choice. And it fell down to the archer, the ranger, actually, the guy with the bow in the front there, voiced by Willie Ames, by the way.
Yep,
good actor. And it was basically the moral decision.
Very dark episode, especially for other cartoons where things are blowing up and everything's going wrong all the time. They really brought this one down to earth, especially for being so mythical and everything. I think that's one of the major complaints. I mean, you got to remember, Dungeons and Dragons was very controversial back in the day. People thought it was going to interrupt their religions and stuff like that. But this was still a very good show.
Excellent.
And, of course, next up, Gilligan's Planet.
This one Pozzible put in just, I think for me, because I'm a huge Gilligan's Island fan. Love the when they did the planet. I loved it. It was basically the professor. He could build anything. He builds a rocket ship to get him off the island. Well, Gilligan screws. I think he's eating a banana. Threw the peel away. It lands on the skipper's head, and skipper rocket ship goes out of control. They end up on a planet.
Same storylines, though, isn't it?
Yeah, it was, and they learned to live on this planet. They wanted to put in season 4 of Gilligan's Island, which never got made. They wanted Gilligan to have a pet dinosaur. Really weird. They added that in the planet. I don't think it would have worked on a TV show from the '60s. It kind of worked with the thing, and in the cartoon, and all the cast most of the cast came back, I believe. I think Marianne did, or Dawn Wells did Marianne and Ginger in this one. I think I might have gotten that wrong. There might have been 2 other actresses doing them. But like the skipper, Gilligan, the Howls, the professor, they did their own voices.
Yeah, it really shows a lot of character for those actors to actually come back and do something like this. Because, it's one thing to be on the show where you're on an island, but now that you're on a cartoon, it's something very weird,
Yeah.
And next up, we also have...
Again, the Dukes. Cartoon version of the Dukes of Hazzard where they're in a race with Boss Hogg around the world. I was a huge Dukes of Hazzard fan. Loved the General Lee 69 Charger. When they made the cartoon, just had to... I had to have it. Again, a lot of the characters came back, I believe, and voiced their animated counterparts.
Exactly. And, I think... Did the storyline change at all here?
I don't remember it that much. I just remember they were racing Boss Hogg around the world. The General Lee had all these gadgets on it now. Like when they made a huge jump, they'd hit a button, say inflate, and the tires would come out and inflate really big, and the General Lee would bounce on its tires and stuff like that.
It was the 80s, the time of the super machines.
Yes.
And of course, you can't talk about the 80s without talking about
Hulk Hogan's Rock and Wrestling. This is another one I'm a huge fan of. I just love that. Again, you got your good guys, your bad guys. This actually really got big with wrestling, and it was like a big wrestling explosion for anybody who's into pro wrestling. This is pretty much kind of what started it all into the mainstream media.
Right. They were doing their shows, but now they were also doing cartoons now, and they were really reaching a younger audience with this one. I remember watching a few episodes. Hulk was the good guy. Rowdy Piper was the bad guy.
The 2 leaders of the factions.
Exactly. Very well written, too. Very funny. They had a lot of jokes in that one.
Yes.
Of course, making fun of, for example, Andre the Giant's size.
Yes. And, he goes to lift a weight machine. He ends up hitting the ceiling with it. And everybody was really over-exaggerated from their wrestling characters. But it was really cool. It was gimmicky. It was silly. But it was one of my classic favorites.
Now, a lot of these shows came and went, lost but not forgotten. Some of the shows, like back in the 80s, we had The Incredible Hulk, and of course we had Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends.
Yeah, off the marketing license, or Marvel license. Both those shows were excellent as well.
The 80s, when it comes to TV shows and cartoons, the 80s belong to Marvel, in my opinion. I think they tried a few things with DC. They had the Justice League from DC.
They had like the Superpowers or Super Guardians or something, which was good, but it didn't capture the magic of Challenge of the Super Friends in the 70s.
Right. A lot of the DC actually was 70s before and it carried over into the 80s, so it really doesn't count here. Now, as promised, we're going to end this with the ultimate 80s cartoon. This is like I said, this is an 80s cartoon that's still in production today. At the time of this show, which was December of 2012, we've got The Simpsons. Matt Groening's family that started on the Tracy Ullman Show back in 1989, 88, 89, and became a series just before 89 turned to 90.
God, look at the difference in them. I mean, you can tell who they are, but I mean, considering what we have now in season 21 or 22.
25 actually.
25.
Yeah, we're getting up there, and they're almost, they're about to become the longest running television show ever, if they haven't reached that already. I think they have 1 or 2 more years left. But this has been the quintessential channel. In some ways, this has defined the culture, our pop culture from the 90s and today. In some lists, the greatest American is considered to be Homer Simpson. Well, guys, I hope you've been enjoying us reminiscing about our shows. I hope you've been remembering those shows as well. It's been a real pleasure.
Hey, take it easy.